Welcome, Dr. Drew Taylor, to the Elixir. We're so excited to have you here today.
Excited to be here.
Thank you. We're here to discuss Acorn Biolabs and the work that you're doing. Before we dig in, why don't you tell me a little bit about you and your background, because it really has a very interesting trajectory into where you're going.
Yeah, I've been pretty blessed that I got to grow up around healthcare. My father was a physician and my mother was a nurse. So I grew up with healthcare being a big part of our family. And I ended up really being drawn to it at an early age. It goes back all the way to about grade 7, where we had to pick a science fair project to do. And so, of course, there's a lot of competition for it. But I chose the total knee arthroplasty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can see why there's a lot of competition for it. But no, I was the only kid that chose that. A lot of guitars, a lot of other things, but you had to break down something mechanically and describe how it worked. So I picked a fake knee. And I got to go in and see a surgery. Probably couldn't do that today with current conditions, but I was really grateful for the time to be able to go in there and witness that. Obviously kept my distance and was told to stand in a certain spot, but I was in the OR and saw the magic happen. And it was a very intense experience for me. My brother got to have the same experience, which was pretty cool. So he got exposed to all of those things as well. But I remember every detail, right? Cleaning under your fingernails at the big sink and letting the water drip off of your elbows as you were scrubbing up. I really just soaked in every moment, the smells, right? The iodine and the different things. But I think what blew me away was seeing that operating team really function as a team and everybody laser focused on what their responsibility was and making sure that this patient had the best care possible. And evidently the young woman who was receiving the surgery that day was a lot younger than I was expecting. I was kind of expecting as a young kid, right, in grade 7, a really elderly person to get brought in. And it was a younger woman. And so that was one thing that struck me because, you start asking the questions, okay, how long will this replacement last? I ended up having some conversations with the physician about that and unfortunately learned that it would break down over time. We'd probably have to have a revision surgery about 10 or 15 years down the road. And that eventually there wouldn't be anything that they could do because bone stock is lost and that patient would be dealing with that for the rest of their lives. And they made a remark to me that in your lifetime, what you will see is instead of us put in plastics and metals, we will actually use our own cells to recreate the tissues for that patient so that they'll be able to give them back their own real joint that hopefully will last a lifetime, be able to respond to shear forces and stresses and not have that interface of a foreign body with your bone and really be a lifelong resource. So anyway, my brother and I went back home, talked to my dad. He sat us down and said, okay, well, what'd you guys think? And I was like, I'm in. I'm going to be a doctor. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life, 100%.
Wow.
My brother said, I'm thinking maybe lawyer. So he didn't have quite the same response. But ultimately, that was my introduction to my passion for healthcare.
Wow. That's a moment. That's a moment to be able to have such a groundbreaking exposure to where you're at right now. You've had quite the journey along the way, though, non-traditional path into medicine. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I went down to the University of Michigan and did a undergrad and a master's degree there in molecular cell developmental biology. So a lot of the inner workings of the cell and different molecular pathways. And I was set to head off to medical school. I was going to stay in Michigan for that. And at the same time, I also got offered a contract to play for the Blue Jays. So it was a pretty exciting moment and bit of a difficult decision to have to make. But I was lucky because my father not only was a doctor, but he also played professional baseball. And so I knew from his example, I was very lucky that you could go have a baseball career and then always stay focused on your academics as well and become a physician. They wouldn't let me do it at the same time though. So I couldn't be enrolled in an MD program and play professionally. So I quickly applied to PhD programs because they would let me do that. And so that was how I got really steered into regenerative medicine, and I'll be forever grateful for that. I enrolled in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and did a PhD in the off seasons. Was still a full-time student, but was only there for a handful of months out of the year, and started chipping away towards a PhD in regenerative medicine.
Just a few things to accomplish, just a few small things.
Let's average it all up.
That's amazing. So let's pretend that our audience knows nothing about regenerative medicine. Let's explain it and maybe dig into Acorn. Let's segue there.
Absolutely. So regenerative medicine, simply put, is our efforts and our endeavors to use cells, tissues, or organs to really replace diseased cells, tissues, and organs so that we return that individual to the state of health from before they ever were sick.
Okay. So
it's really about replacing diseased cells, tissues, even all the way up to organs, with fully functional new ones.
Okay. And so how does Acorn fit into this? Let's just dig right in.
Yeah. So I ended up in that same hospital doing training and working in the Division of Orthopedics, Mount Sinai Hospital here in Toronto, where I witnessed that surgery in grade 7. And so I was working with the orthopedics team, and my role in that group was to essentially take some very successful animal studies and translate them into human models. So we were able to take a sample of cells from animals and regrow them sheets of cartilage on demand in laboratory so that we could implant those. And those studies had those studies had been taken all the way to actually implanting cartilage into animals. Wow. And so now my role was to actually say, okay, let's work with human cells. So really exciting, but a big challenge. So I ended up going into the OR, same OR where I was from back in grade 7, and taking biopsies of patient cells and bringing them back to the lab to see if in practice we could grow out functional tissues that one day would replace those metals and plastics that we put in during arthroplastic surgery or fake knees and fake hips. And it didn't go perfectly. So we learned a lot of things, and to save you guys a ton of really boring reading, it boiled down to 2 things. The human cells were not performing to the same level as the animal cells because of age and the onset of disease. It had nothing to do with the species-specific nature. All of the animal studies were young juvenile animals, so basically like teenagers. And now I'm going into an OR, and these are people that are mostly elderly, have complicating conditions like osteoarthritis, and are not in the highest state of health. And so now we're taking cells at their worst and asking them to perform again at their best and really recreate the tissues that would be needed to replace. And it just didn't go that well. And so these big hurdles were in front of us. And it was a very sad moment in my career, because ultimately I'm sitting back saying, we're doing this because we want to help people. Mm-hmm. And precisely at the moment of need is when we see these patients. And they're going to come to us in the future when these things are accessible. And they're going to say, look, I need a new cartilage in my knee. I heard that this regenerative medicine therapy is now available. Can you please do it? And we're going to have to say, no, I'm sorry, you're not a candidate because you're either too old or too sick. And so in that rare case where we actually have a younger individual that might be struggling with a condition, then they would have the cellular health for us to actually be able to leverage those cells. And so it wasn't a future that we were willing to accept. And that's exactly what Acorn was founded to try to interrupt. We want to make sure that everybody has access to their best possible cells to leverage in the future when they need them.
Mic drop. So good. Tell me about the process and how you're different from other companies, because there are other companies out there doing similar things, but I want to know your differentiator and what would I get as a client going in?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, let's just talk about what we do. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially freeze the aging process on your cells, or a small portion of them. And so by taking a small biopsy, we're able to cryogenically freeze that at temperatures down at negative 190 and lower degrees Celsius. So if you saw Terminator when the liquid nitrogen truck spilled all over the T-3000 or whatever it was and froze them solid, very cold. And at that temperature, cells don't age. Their metabolism stops. So we literally have cells of yours frozen in time. So you can go about your life and keep on aging, and some of your cells are not.
I really feel like this is like a Marvel movie right now. I'm in like a Marvel moment.
Yeah, well, look at, you go back not too far, and this was science fiction, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, it It is pretty wild, but it's also extremely exciting because
Yeah.
we're really harnessing some of these new technologies to help make sure that people are going to be able to take advantage of these leaps forward in healthcare in the future. So
I have so many questions, but I'm going to let you continue.
So there's some big challenges to that. We've been freezing cells, and when I say we, I mean the scientific community. We've been freezing cells since the 1960s. Right? I may look like I've been around since the 60s, but not quite.
No.
So the cells that we can freeze down have been mostly around fertility, like freezing eggs and sperm,
Yes, yeah.
and then cells for research, right? So we've been freezing cells down to experiment with for a very long time. And we know that process very, very well, and it's been perfected and improved over the years. But just as late as the last 24 months, we've pulled samples, or groups have pulled samples from the 60s and brought back cells that have been frozen for 60 plus years back to life, and cultured them and expanded them, and shown that those cells are viable and survive that process. So we're starting to have quite a long longevity of demonstrating the power of having cells frozen for long periods of time. And you can do that because when you freeze cells, damage really accumulates only when you're freezing them down and when you're thawing them. Once they're plateaued at that lower temperature, nothing's happening to them. So the amount of time that they're frozen really is inconsequential. Like theoretically, you could freeze cells for 1,000 years. It's really just making sure that you freeze them down correctly and thaw them correctly.
And so what cells are we freezing?
Good question. So we put a lot of work into this because ultimately we have had ways where we've tried to access cells historically to do this. It's not an entirely new concept. People have been trying to actually find cells that would be appropriate to freeze down. And so there have been some approaches looking at the umbilical cord blood. So when you do have a baby, you can actually take the umbilical cord and freeze down the undifferentiated blood cells that are within that and have that as a resource for your child. People have looked at harvesting and storing bone marrow.
Feels painful, yeah?
It's very painful.
Also, is this to go back to the umbilical cord? Is there not like a timestamp on that one?
There's a timestamp on it, not because when the cells are frozen they expire, but rather those cells are traditionally very difficult to grow and culture and actually make more of.
Okay.
And I think that there's a number of really interesting groups that are trying to solve that problem. But right now, we only actually get enough cells from an umbilical cord as Health Canada and the FDA have determined enough cells to treat somebody who's 18 years or younger. So it's actually the volume of those cells that we get that's the timestamp on it.
Okay, interesting. I understand now. So back to Acorn.
So
not umbilical, not bone marrow.
No, we're not going to drill into someone's iliac crest, put them through a very painful surgical procedure that does have some risks and morbidity elements to it. So we're not going to put them through that to prospectively bank cells. So we really looked at how can we do this painlessly, maybe even non-invasively, but also make sure that we get a high quality cell. Because it's very easy to swab your mouth or to spit into a tube, but you only really get the genetics from that because the cells are either dead, highly contaminated with bacteria and things. Like a sample that you would send off for a DNA kit is not appropriate for regenerative medicine. So we really need to access cells in a different way. And it turns out the hair follicle is literally perfect for this. So you have this small bulb at the end of every follicle, and we have over 100,000 on our heads. And that bulb is thousands of cells, not only thousands of cells, but multiple germ layers. So we have different types of cells within that. There's a very high percentage relative to other areas of the body of adult stem cells. And it grows back when you pluck that follicle.
Wild,
so you're not even sacrificing that follicle.
And so the client's coming in or going to an extraction site. I don't know if that's the right word.
Sounds intimidating.
I know, like a hair removal site. And they're you're essentially taking the follicle, bringing it to your lab,
Correct.
Treating it.
Yeah. So you
I'm
would
sure
go,
it's a lot more sophisticated
so
than
you
what
go
I just
into a
explained.
clinic that is offering the service. They essentially will pluck follicles from the back of your scalp, basically from ear to ear. It's the last place that men go bald. There's higher levels of testosterone in that area, which is very important for follicle health, and a number of reasons why we target that area. And it's 50 follicles get plucked, which sounds like a lot, but it is not. I've
You're
done
not going to leave with a big bald.
There's there's no bald spots, right? I mean, it's the equivalent of going into British Columbia and cutting down 50 trees. You're not going to notice. And those cells then actually get transported to our central laboratory, which is in the middle of one of Toronto's largest hospitals. We run a full ISO grade clean room laboratory where those cells are triple washed, analyzed. Pictures are taken of them under the microscope where we do staining for viability and membrane integrity to make sure that your sample is very well taken and viable for the future. And then those cells go into a very particular controlled rate freeze that we control with some amazing high-end machinery that allows them to reach that stasis level of negative 190 plus degrees Celsius. And they are accessible for you for the rest of your life.
I feel like this is massive. This is going to change the future of medicine. I mean, it probably is already changing the future of medicine, but it's got to be more than bones. It's got to be, what else? What are we? Because, if I look at my industry, lab-based technologies are sort of where the innovation is happening. Mm-hmm. So, PRP, for example, is something we're taking, we're drawing blood and spinning it, extracting the plasma and using it for regeneration of the skin. Mm-hmm. Maybe not full regeneration in the same capacity, but rejuvenation is probably a better word. Yep. But my argument, and I'm not comparing PRP to what you're doing, I understand that it's different, but if I look at, the examples coming in, if we're taking 55-year-old cells and putting them on the face of a 55-year-old woman, they're older cells. So we tend to lean towards lab. I do anyways in my practice. Yeah. Who's the ideal candidate for this age-wise? And then also, to spin off my previous question, it's not just bones. It's got to be, you've got to be in the beauty space too. It's got to be something anti-aging. I can feel it.
Well, cartilage is a type of connective tissue. So is your skin. So there's a lot of correlates to my experience and the work that I did that have translated over to Acorn extremely well. And the first targets for the use of these cells in the future is absolutely in skincare. It's coming. It's coming very quick. The best thing we can do now is prepare for it and just make sure that we get a better resource. And ultimately, you're right. There are PRP. In my career, I've seen it actually help a number of people. But there's some limitations with PRP that, as patients, we need to understand and set expectation levels so that we understand what we may receive from those things, because it might be minuscule benefits that we're not going to actually be able to visibly see. And that's a problem in aesthetic medicine.
It's a huge problem. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. That's the thing, it's an improper management of expectations. This isn't this isn't going to change your life in 2 weeks. It's like low and slow and repeated over time. So I just want to bold italics highlight what you just said.
No, that's very fair. Yeah. And also we need to understand that we're leveraging you, right? We're not manufacturing chemical compounds in a laboratory, right? Where the purity of those elements, right, and how they were created is the importance. We're actually taking some of you and leveraging that to deliver benefit. So the starting material is yourself.
Yeah.
And that's really where we need to think about, well, how powerful is that starting material now? And that's where I've seen some of the people that have received the most amount of benefit from PRP have a better starting material. Right. They're younger, they're extremely healthy, right? Dealing in orthopedics, I saw a lot of high-level athletes have immense benefit in return to sport faster and pain management from an injury using PRP.
Right.
And I've absolutely seen people have fantastic results in aesthetic medicine for skincare. That being said, right, there are some limiting factors in there that we need to understand and realize that we're part of that limit ourselves. It's not our doctor.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's the part that's missed though often. It's empty promises. But back to your space, which sounds really exciting. Who is the ideal candidate? who is the, or maybe not the ideal candidate, because it seems like everybody can do it, but what's the age pocket that you tend to target?
Yeah, and this is where it gets exciting because it is a big difference from PRP, right? With PRP, we're taking it at that time and giving it right back to the patient.
Right.
But what we are doing is we're actually locking in a time point, right? So if you are, and we have clients as old as 83, 84, right? And their mindset, God bless them, is I want to live to 100 and I'm going to be around in my 90s by the time I hopefully need something. And that's another 10 plus years away where I'm going to be able to have cells that haven't been aging for a decade. And that's, I think, the biggest difference. PRP is an immediate use, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of intro regenerative medicine. And it can be very powerful, but imagine if you're able to store a resource for yourself that hasn't aged for the past 2, 5, 10 years. And so the difference in time as well is equally important from the quality of that resource, right? Because whatever you're going to have into the future is unfortunately, like death and taxes, right? It is getting worse, right?
Yeah.
That's inevitable.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how many push-ups you did that morning, you are a day older.
Just do a bunch of push-ups
Yeah.
before we do the extraction and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I have so many questions. So, do you have an optimal age? Like, what if you could pick an age or a group?
There are some moments of what I would describe as a heightened sense of urgency.
Okay.
Right? So if we can track a number of different things, but one of the predominant ones is the amount of adult stem cells that we have as a population in our body, right? And we see that really plateau in our 20s, right? We start our adult life, we've got our set amount, and at some point in our 20s, you see it start to decline already.
Oh, that's depressing.
I know, very. Right? So at some point in our 20s, depending on the individual, it will start to dip. Okay, and you have a very slow arithmetic decline of the amount of cells that we have that are adult stem cells in our bodies. For most people, it's in their 60s, right around 65, but there's a moment where that picks up pace, and we see the number of stem cells in our bodies drop much quicker.
Okay.
But there's all sorts of metrics, like in aesthetic medicine, right? Our skin, every year that goes by, produces 1% less collagen. Right? So if you've got cells locked in, they're going to be producing the same amount if you had banked them in your 20s as we know how great our skin is in our 20s, right? So those are the types of things that we're trying to get ahead of. So it's not really about selecting a material that we're going to try to apply a therapy for in that day. And it's not just your age, but the distance in time from when you bank them and when you leverage them.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question and I don't want you to take offense. How do you approach the idea of selling a maybe? Not that the science is a maybe. I believe the science. I understand that. But how are we talking about this to people who, in my industry, it's like immediate results. You want to walk out looking better. You want to glow. You want whatever, an adjustment of your bone structure with filler, whatever. How do we sell?
There are plenty of things that do that. Plenty. Okay. And we're not. That's okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
But how do we I'm okay with it not being the same, but I want to understand how are we talking about what's to come with this preservation?
Yeah. So I don't think, and again, I'm somebody that's living this, right? Stem cell biologist and all of these things. This is what I chose for my career. It's not a maybe, right? In my mind, it's a matter of when.
Great.
Not if.
Okay.
And so ultimately, I think everybody that wants to think about banking their cells for the future, they have to make their own decision in their mind if they think they're going to be around for that future when it does come.
Okay.
And also certain elements of that future are coming very quickly and others we're going to have to be patient for. The most important thing that we have to exude, I think, as individuals or as patients is patience. Right?
Yeah.
We need to make sure that these things are safe and efficacious before we start doing them to our bodies.
Yeah.
And that's extremely important because stem cells is quite a hot word. And there's a lot of people that are offering stem cell this or that. And I think that, there's a sea of things that are being offered for immediate gratification and benefit.
Especially in my space.
And some of it probably a little premature from a safety perspective. And we need to be aware of that. And hopefully, I think we all have a role in making sure that we help protect people that aren't able to discern that difference, right? But it's a hard task. For us, we want to make sure that your cells are banked and available for you to leverage in a safe and efficacious way that has been well proven.
Yeah.
There's certain elements that we're going to have to be mindful are going to take time, right? There are groups in Tel Aviv that are literally 3D printing miniature human hearts from a biopsy of your skin cells, same types of cells that we take. Okay, that they've gotten the heart to be about as big as a rabbit's heart, so it's miniaturized right now, but they can coax it into beating, it can carry blood. Like, these are amazing leaps forward. There's no question in our lifetimes, we will see the first 3D printed heart put into a patient. And how it performs is going to be the quality of the cells that they created that heart from.
Are you so excited? How do you not get like,
jazzed.
Yeah. I mean, this is really, I'm excited. This is awesome. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about, you mentioned bones, you mentioned aesthetic, beauty, skincare. Is there anything else that we're looking at that this provides?
Absolutely. So in skincare, I think we need to break it down to like short, medium, and long-term expectations, right? And so we don't make any promises, but these are the things that we're working on and others are working on. And just so people know, cells that are collected and banked in this way have been given back to patients in clinical trials already. So these cells are benefiting human beings today.
So it's not even that it's a maybe. This is like full on functioning, happening now kind of stuff.
It is happening right now, right? The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So people are receiving benefit from this in trials right now to treat everything from diabetic foot ulcers, wound healing closure, burn victims, right? So a lot of the things that are in these trials are really to benefit people that have either, an injury or a disease that we're trying to manage. But there is absolutely treatments also in just pure aesthetic medicine, right? And I would classify them in what's coming in short, medium, and long. In the short term, it's not actually giving you back those live cells that we have banked. It's taking a small part of them, not all of them, just some of them that you've frozen down, and culturing them in a laboratory and getting them to produce collagens, hyaluronic acid, collagen-linked protein, IGF-1, all the growth factors that are in PRP and more, right? These cells then become a resource or a factory to create your own autologous products of the things that your cells need to stay youthful and to really rejuvenate.
This is insane.
Yeah, that's coming extremely quickly.
I don't even know I can't even process that. I don't even have a question. I'm gonna sit with this for a minute and let you tell me what else this can do.
In the medium term, it's when we actually start to take the cells themselves and reintroduce them back into you. They're your own cells. So again, we're doing this for individuals, for themselves, because there's no immune rejection. You don't have to put yourself on immunosuppressants, which we would never do for an aesthetic treatment, right? Too risky. So we're using your own cells and we're reintroducing them to your skin, either subdermally. And so what that does is it gives you back a population of younger cells that are better at producing all of those things into your skin. Now, I saw this firsthand with cartilage, another type of connective tissue that we talked about earlier. And ultimately, we ended up taking samples of older human cartilage cells and younger human cartilage cells and culturing them together. But we didn't allow them to touch. We only allowed them to be right beside each other so that we could discern how they were performing themselves. And the younger cells, just from the things that they were releasing into the media, into the liquid that we were culturing them in, made the older cells perform like younger cells again.
I can't even, this is like, I feel like it's like Death Becomes Her. Like that, has anybody seen that movie, Death Becomes Her? Like, I feel like it's that movie. You're like real life. Have you never seen it? Oh my God, it is. Has anybody seen that movie? No, it's just, I have the worst movie references, but this is exciting. Yeah. This is really exciting.
In the long term, it is something that we really have to be patient for, right? These are where we're actually manipulating the cells to edit out disease, to modify them so that, we're modifying them so that they are not able to produce a disease that we would inherently or inevitably get. So these are very powerful therapies that are going to have to go through years-long trials at every stage. But we are engaged in some of them because we have such an ideal cell source, right? For us, the idea of being able to pluck follicles is so accessible. And so we've got projects with some of the top institutions across Canada. And these grants with Mount Sinai Hospital, University of Toronto, National Research Council, we are looking at trying to drive forward the research in some of those longer term endeavors. And so at Acorn, we have taken a hair follicle, we've cultured it out to multiply it. We've reprogrammed those cells to behave like a pluripotent stem cell, which is pluripotent means it can become anything, and then push those cells down to become pancreas cells. So in our lab, we've created a population of pancreas cells from a patient's hair follicle.
So you're basically Frankenstein then.
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe, but look, for me, it's very personal.
In like the nicest way.
Yeah, no, I know you do, and I agree, right? Like, so for instance, my brother has type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
Right, so that one's very close to my heart, and the idea of us being able to actually recreate a pancreas, or at least the beta islet cells that are responsible for producing insulin inside a pancreas, and deliver that back to my brother, means that he will not have to do insulin injections X times a day and be worried about, his blood sugar dropping and all of these things. You'll be delivering that ability to create insulin for himself and have his body actually react hormonally in the same way, right? These are the endeavors that we're striving for. They're not, going to be here tomorrow, but the fact that we are pushing the envelope to get closer and closer to it is really exciting.
Wow. So I think the thing that people really need to understand that's crucial is that this is actually really affordable at Acorn. It's not, well, at least I think it is. For the extraction, it's affordable. For the storage, it's affordable. It's an annual fee, I'm right?
Yeah,
correct?
You can choose annual or monthly, depending on what your preference is. But ultimately, we are Canadians, so we want to make sure that people have access to healthcare. And while this is an out-of-pocket kind of proactive thing that people are going to be doing, we wanted to make sure that it was reasonable and approachable and people could afford it. So, prices for the collection will vary by clinic, but to keep them, banked and stored at negative 190 degrees Celsius and locked away in a facility like Fort Knox, if you can afford Stranger Things, you can afford Acorn.
Well, right? It's also, if you're going to pay for insurance, you might as well pay for real, tangible, real life insurance.
Well, this is biologic health insurance, right?
Yeah.
I think there's the near-term things that we're seeing that's happening in aesthetics, and those are going to be amazing. But the way that we even set it up is that you can use your sample for those things and still have it reserved, right? Because we divide it into multiple vials. So you can still have a reserve for that biologic health insurance policy that in 40 years down the road, we have the ability to 3D print you a new heart, and you need one. You're going to be really happy that you made that investment. So it is very much a biologic health insurance policy.
I'm shook. I think that this is such an important conversation. I think it's a conversation that is going to be really new for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And especially, it's one thing to come at it from, a skin health beauty perspective, but this is so much more than that. And I can't wait for people to hear about it and feel comfortable with the idea, because there's so much stigma around it, or maybe not stigma, so much that's misunderstood about it. And I just, in my few conversations with you, have completely shifted perspective on what this means and how it can help people. So thank you so much for sharing your time and enlightening me.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. Honestly, I really appreciate it, because this is new, right? And I think it's one of those things where we really want people to know you can do this. We're not, we just want to make sure everybody's ready and everybody's going to be able to benefit from it, because the worst thing would be if we have to go to those patients down the road years from now and say, I'm sorry, you're not a candidate. We want to eliminate that.
Well, I'll keep shouting to everybody I know. Thanks so much for your time, Dr. Drew.